Good evening, everyone. I am Jody Green. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning and the Director of the Campus Teaching Center, the Center for Innovations in Teaching and Learning. And we will begin tonight's event with a land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awaswas-speaking Yupi tribe. The Amamutsan tribal band comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to missions Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. So it is my very great pleasure to welcome you tonight to Beyond Reopening College Classrooms, the landscape of learning in and after COVID-19. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge what is on many of our hearts and minds tonight, the momentous news of the conviction of the murderer of George Floyd and all that that means for Black lives here and elsewhere, even as we grieve for 15-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant in Columbus, Ohio, who was killed by the police she had called for help while the verdict was being read. Oh. So tonight I am joined by colleagues, and it's a really delightful opportunity to work together to show you some of what we've been doing and to talk with you about what we might carry forward into the time after COVID-19. So tonight I'm joined by Michael Tassio, the Director of Online Education and my continual partner in crime throughout the remote instruction period, and three of our faculty colleagues who have agreed to come here tonight and show you some of the amazing things that they've been doing during COVID-19. So I'm joined by Allegra Arroy Reveles, Assistant Teaching Professor in Chemistry and Biochemistry, Jennifer Parker, Professor of Art and Digital Arts and New Media and Director of the UCSC Open Lab, and Pranav Anand, Professor and Chair of the Department of Linguistics. So I want you to know that this event is being recorded. We have taken to recording our events because we know that things come up for people, and we want to make sure that it's as accessible as possible to people after the fact. So everybody who registered for tonight's event will receive the recording. The format, we've decided to not do this in a webinar format because we wanted to be able to see you and interact with you during the event and actually engage with you and to use some of the engagement tools that we use with students and with each other during COVID. So that's why we're in this, this format. It makes things a little bit more complicated for us than the webinar format. So if we have some hiccups, I'll just ask you to bear with us. This has been our experience. Living and teaching and learning during COVID. So you'll get a realistic experience if we stumble from time to time. So we have you muted and you can later, when we get to the Q&A part, you can raise your hand and I will have a list of who's raised their hand and the order in which they've raised it, which is a gift for teachers. It's actually one of the greatest things about COVID-19 era teaching. And then we'll go down that list and you can unmute yourself at that time and ask your question. You can also ask questions in the chat, but because there's a lot of you, we want to ask you if you have a question that you want to ask in the chat, maybe because we're recording or just because you prefer that way. If you could wait to put your question in the chat until the Q&A starts, we anticipate there may be a lot of chatter in the chat and we won't be able to go back and find your question as easily. So if you could hold off on putting questions in the chat until we actually get to the question time. So I want to thank, before we actually get into this, the staff of University Relations who've helped us put together this event. CITL has done many previous events for Alumni Weekend, and it's really kind of wonderful to be able to participate in this virtual event and knowing that that means that more people from faraway places can join us. I also want to acknowledge there are many UCSC faculty and staff members on this call, and we hope that you'll chime in with some of your own experiences later on. I want to thank Kendra Doherty, the Associate Director for Graduate Programs of the CITL, who has helped us to design tonight's event. And I want to thank Aaron Zachmeyer, who is helping us in part by making sure that we don't get Zoom bombed, which is an ever real experience for us as we teach and learn during COVID. We've had many Zoom bombings on campus, and so we have some protocols in place that we can use to pull the plug on individuals or collectives should we need to do that. So the last thing I want to say is that for those of you who've attended other events that Michael and I have hosted this year, either through UR or otherwise, this event is a little bit different in the sense that we're not going to give you a big high level account of kind of what we've seen and what we think is going to happen going forward. We're just going to talk for about 5 minutes or less about that, and then we're actually going to allow our colleagues to demonstrate some of what has been really great that's been happening educationally and pedagogically this year. But before we do that, oh, and I wanted to invite those of you who are here on phones, if you can, to rename yourself, if that's possible, so that some of your alumni friends might be able to find you. But before we go any farther into the event, we're going to start with a poll. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Michael.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's so nice to see so many friends too, and also alum, including myself. It's good to see so many of you. I'll also say about Aaron, who's doing the Zoom bombing security for us. He's our lead instructional designer and has worked on so many of these courses that you're going to see. So thank you so much, Aaron. Okay. For the alumni in particular, we've created what's called a Jamboard. And in our online courses and our remote courses, we really rely on instructional technologies to generate community, to create engagement between students and instructors, and students, of course, and their graduate students. And we've created this Jam. And a Jamboard's a Google product. We use lots of different Google products in our courses. I'm going to drop it into the chat for you right now. And fingers crossed this works for all of you. Why don't you click on that, and hopefully this also won't crash. Good, I see so many people joining it. Okay, so
and if you can't click on it, click the 3 dots right next to it, and that will copy the link for you, and you can put that into a browser.
Awesome, thank you, Jody. So yeah, you can see you're all editors actually, so you're able to move stuff around. That's part of the fun of live teaching like this. You see the directions on frame 1. There are a bunch of different frames, and you can see at the very top, there is a box that says 1/6. And if you scroll through those different frames, you'll see that they're ordered alphabetically by your last name. And if you find your frame, and we'd really love for you to create a sticky note, and the sticky note is the 4th option down in the toolbar on the left, and just say something about, place it on the map, something that you learned while at UCSC. So it might have been like, I remember for myself, quite clearly being in the Stevenson Coffee House, reading Plato for the first time and kind of having my mind blown at the poetic nature of it, the art of it, and also the deep philosophy to it.
Okay, so we're going to leave that Jamboard up, and we may come back there later on in the event. But for now, we just wanted to start with a very quick warm-up conversation between Michael and myself. And I am just going to ask you, Michael, what are 3 things that you hope we will carry forward from the period of remote instruction? And what is 1 thing that you hope will be left behind?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jody. So the first thing that comes to mind, a challenge for all of us during remote instruction, was preserving academic integrity. So it's of course possible for, students are taking exams at their computer, and it's so much easier to scan the internet for answers and to cheat. And especially when you put students under a lot of pressure, they're more likely to do that. And so what I hope we keep from this is the redesign of our assessments to make them more collaborative so that they have more opportunities for students to practice, so that as they're working towards what might be a higher stakes assessment, they've had that practice time, they're less stressed, they're less likely to do something that they would regret. So all of that, and working in online education, I really love the integration of digital tools into our assignments. So really rethinking how we ask students to express the skills and knowledge that they're acquiring in their courses. And so this is not necessarily through a paper. As so many of us wrote, especially if we were in social sciences or humanities. This might be through developing a podcast, it might be through developing a video, et cetera. So online courses really push us to think about how we can do things differently in teaching and learning. So that's the first main thing that I would really love to see kept from this. Another thing I've been reflecting on a lot lately as we think about a return to campus in the fall is really cherishing our time in the classroom. I think we've taken for granted our classroom time, and teaching in a remote setting or in an online course has really pushed us to rethink how we'll use that class time. And it might be more group work, it might be more like what we call flipped classrooms, which is a kind of active learning that we do in the class. And it could be less lecturing, or it could be doing more online lectures with more active learning in the classroom. And you're going to hear about all these sorts of things as we move into other presentations, but that's something I really hope we keep. And for online courses, finally, for my third, online courses in particular, we have struggled to build community in those courses. We found like, wow, this is something that's really hard to do, to create the community that students gain so naturally in the in-person setting as they see each other, sit next to each other, talk on the way to class, is building that back in. So rethinking our space in the virtual setting, so digital spaces to provide students with those opportunities, either structured or not, to develop community. So that's what I'm really excited about keeping. And I note that that's a work in progress. We have not figured it out, but we are still working towards it. And in terms of what to let go of, definitely the highs and lows of courses. And I'm speaking particularly about the student experience here. So the peaks and valleys that they might experience through a midterm to a final and so on. I think courses can be designed so that students are able to practice what they're learning throughout. And I want to see more of that in all of our courses going forward. But Jody, more importantly, I would really love to hear what you think. What are 3 things that you'd love to see kept, and what's something that you could let go of?
Yeah, so I challenged myself not to say in advance, not to make a list in advance of what my 3 things were going to be. So the first thing that pops to mind for me is intentionality about course design. Now, that might seem, a little bit abstract, but really, as someone who, taught here for 20 years and then started working at a teaching center, we put a lot of our, like many new teaching centers, we put a lot of our attention in the beginning into what are people's teaching practices in the live classroom. And we didn't really get to course design until a little bit later, but it has been just mind-blowing during COVID to work with the faculty to redesign every single class that we have on this campus in an intentional way, and to use the research that we'd been gathering at the teaching center before that, and then the research that Citadel and Online Ed and the ITS people together did this year to get super intentional about course design. So I'm really excited about that. I now often will say a poorly designed course that is very well taught will yield less learning than a well-designed course that is poorly taught. And that's something that we've really learned during COVID. Definitely the second thing that I would keep is what is called the pedagogy of care. We've just become much more aware of the struggles that our students have this year, and much more inclined to reach out to them and ask them about their experience. So it's a more responsive, there's been lots of surveying of students, there's been lots of, polling them, there's been lots of saying, reach out, here are ways to reach out to me. It's been an enormous amount of work for instructors, and I worry sometimes that the pedagogy of care is sort of care labor that is unrecognized as labor, but it is a real sea change in how we approach how we think of our role as teachers, is really much more sort of granular with the totality of the student's life than it was pre-COVID. And one small piece of that is just much more awareness about making our course materials accessible. So whether it's captioning or making sure our PDFs are accessible, we've really put an enormous amount of effort, including with a student core that helps instructors to make sure our course materials are accessible. I think the final one is one that we were starting to work on pre-COVID, but that you're going to see in spades tonight in the presentations, which is just allowing students more opportunities to choose how they want to show their learning. And that is just unleashes their creativity. I mean, I definitely was that instructor who had, you must show me your learning in the ways that I have determined in advance. And it, you know, later in my teaching career, I realized that the more freedom I gave students to choose how to show their learning, the better the work they did. And maybe that's not every assessment or assignment in the class, but at least one assignment that says, show me how you want to learn. Last spring, when George Floyd was murdered, days before the final exam period, and instructors kept coming to us and saying, what do I do? What do I do? We just said over and over again, let them show you their learning in any way they want. And we heard from so many instructors that this was a kind of revolutionary for them. The thing that I would get rid of is the overwhelming feeling of separateness that people had this year. And I think one way that we do that is that we come back in person. And another way that we do it is that we get much better at using these tools. We know that all education is going to be technologically enhanced after COVID. There's no question about that. So the question is, how do we get better at using the technology to support intimacy than we were pre-COVID, and maybe than we are even now. So with that, I know that one of the things that both Michael and I agree on is that something that we hope will go forward post-COVID is instructors pre-recording their lectures and making them available to students in advance so that classroom time can be used for active learning. Michael, do you want to say a little bit about why we chose the little snippet of video that we chose?
Yeah, I mean, this video is from Professor Michael Chemers, and there are so many things that are so excellent about it. I love also that it was a reward to his students. So it's a course on monsters, and he promised them if a certain number of students.
So, is the Easter Bunny a monster? Well, let's go over again, if we can remember, what the 7 theses of the monsters are. First of all, the monster's body is a cultural body. Second of all, the monster always escapes. Third of all, the monster is the harbinger of category crisis. 4, the monster dwells at the gates of difference.
This also really exemplifies
5, the monster polices the borders of the possible or the
videographer and instructional
designer. 6, fear of the monster is really a kind of desire. And number 7, the monster stands at the threshold.
I'll give you an example of it right now.
All right, so first of all, can a bunny of any kind be a monster? Let's have a look at a real bunny and see what we think about this. Here is a bunny eating a raspberry. It's so cute. Or is it? So there are all kinds of stories about people in England and Germany venerating rabbits, hunting them, giving them as gifts, keeping them as pets, and spreading stories among children that the Osterhase comes on Easter Sunday and lays colored eggs, and the kids build nests for the bunnies to put the eggs in. That goes back hundreds of years, but this one is very interesting. I'm just picking one out of the many, many, many. It had long been customary on Easter Monday for the mayor and his brethren. This is a story about the Easter hare. It had long been customary on Easter Monday for the mayor and his brethren in their scarlet gowns, attended by the proper officers in form, to go to a certain close, by which they mean a grove of trees, okay, called Black Annis's Bower Close, parcel of or bordering upon Leicester Forest. This is in the Midlands of England. To see the diversion of hunting, or rather the trailing of a cat, the Easter hare, before a pack of hounds, a custom perhaps originating out of a claim to the royalty of the forest. So people did this because the king would come along and say, okay, that's my forest, and they say, no, 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 we need to keep this forest because we have this ancient custom that goes on in this forest, and we can't be stopped. They can't stop us from doing it. And they would say, what is this ancient custom? Oh, well, we hunt the Easter hare through there, I guess, right? And so then they do some silly thing just to maintain this tradition. This happens a lot. However, I know a little something about black anise. You remember this? Black Annis's bower close. I know who Black Annis is from my research on monsters. This is Black Annis. 'Tis said the soul of mortal men recoiled to view Black Annis's eye so fierce and wild. Vast talons, foul with human flesh, there grew in place of hands, and features livid blue glared in her visage, while the obscene waist warm skins of human victims close embraced. Black Annis is a hag, a kindertod, a child eater. She is a night hag. For those of you who play Dungeons and Dragons, you might know that there's such a thing as an Annis hag, okay? But you don't have to trust me for it. Here's J.K. Rowling. In the Harry Potter Daily Prophet, in one of the Harry Potter books, there's a letter to the editor from someone called Annis Black, who's angry at the prophet for depicting hags as flesh-eating monsters. She then offers her services as a babysitter. Here's what we know. German settlers brought the practice of hiding eggs and attributing them to a magical hare to Pennsylvania in the 18th century, and the custom just stuck. There can be little doubts that the roots of the Osterhase are pre-Christian, likely fertility and sex springtime rituals. Does it matter? The question that we were asking is the Easter Bunny a pagan monster? No, it's not. It's not a monster, people, okay? If you run down the 7 things, the Easter Bunny doesn't do any of the 7 things, okay? It's not a monster. The Easter Bunny is probably not a monster. However, the Easter Bunny is associated with Black Annis. Happy Easter, everyone.
So for those of you who hear pre-recorded lecture and think about somebody in their kitchen on YouTube, this is to show you that that is not really what we're talking about when we talk about pre-recorded lectures. And one of the really cool things about pre-recorded lectures is that people have really been encouraged to make them chunked so that they're really broken up into mini lectures of 5 or 7 or 10 minutes. And so people are not overwhelmed by, you know, the 11th century pedagogy that I practiced of lecturing for an hour and 45 minutes. I don't know if there are any former students of mine on this call, but that is exactly how I lectured. So this is a much more effective way when it comes to supporting student learning. Okay. So with the topic of supporting student learning, I am going to turn it over to our first speaker. So we're going to have these 3 presentations by Allegra, Jennifer, and Pranav. And then we will have just a couple comments in between from Michael and I about maybe things that we find particularly compelling for the future of higher education in what we saw. And then it's magical to be able to mute people. And then we'll open it up for a general discussion. So with that, Allegra, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We are going to start with a reflection question. So I want you to type in the chat for about 30 seconds what you think carrying instruction looks like. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that. So we're not going to go into breakout rooms. We're going to do this through the chats. We have personal focus, responsiveness, personal tension, taking students' goals as your own, being present, being aware, getting to know students, flexible, checking in, focusing on student growth and learning, caring, personal, directed, responsive, empathetic with students and focusing on learning objectives rather than habits and traditional requirements. Oh, wow. Yes, humanizing listening. Yes, this is all that I think that caring instruction should be. And so now our question is, how do we do this? Okay, we know what it looks like, but how do we do this? And in my case, and in many of the cases of people that teach large lecture classes, is how do we do this with 475 students, okay? Or 800 students like I had in the fall. What do we do? So what I am going to show you first actually is just this is kind of my intro. This is the very first thing that students will read into the syllabus, okay? Is my welcome message. Thank you for joining our community of learners. I want to point out particularly that last sentence, the last two sentences, that you will be challenged and supportive, and please be prepared to take an active, critical, patient, and generous role in your own learning and that of your classmates. And especially right now, kind of again, in this time of great uncertainty with so much anxiety producing news, we really have to know why we are here. Why am I learning about atoms? And so we really encourage students to ask us and to really keep our goal for what we are, why are we here as college students? Why are we here in this virtual classroom? What are we doing, and that this does matter, and this is helping us advance. And so, and this is how we start off the course. I'm going to actually show you a bit of video from one of my videos that I've done with online education with Vernon, our videographer. So let me get that to you. And so this is our video welcome. And I'm just going to show you just a little tiny bit so you get to see what students see. And then I started teaching general chemistry. I am a teaching professor here at Ucsc. It's my third year. I love to teach. I love teaching general chemistry. I'm really grateful to be here because I was born in Santa Cruz. Most academics have to go away to find a job, and I did go away for a little bit, but I was able to come back, and I feel very grateful for that opportunity. I love to work with students, especially students that are kind of in their first year of college or first year of graduate school, because there's a lot that happens in college that you're not told of, things that you should be doing or activities that would really help you. So please talk with me about anything and encompassing science or life, or just, what does it mean to be a college student? And I would really be happy to work with you. So instead of our lecture hall, which you see here, this is lecture hall classroom unit 2. It fits 475 students, and normally we would be teaching in this classroom. So you would see me as a little person up at the front of the class. I really wouldn't be able to see you very well at the back of the class, and we don't have to do that, okay? So we're here in this virtual format, and I'm really excited to teach this class this way because it's really providing a lot of opportunities for you as a student. Number one, we have flexibility. You get to watch the videos when you want. The videos are very focused, and it is all on your time when you want to watch them and rewatch them. So that is the intro video. We are not in classroom unit 2 either. We would probably be there if we were in person. So we have a very different experience. This is part of the student experience now. And so with that, I just wanted to talk about a little bit about how how we are designing this student-centered remote classroom, and we are putting the student at the absolute center. So all those things that you said about what caring instruction looks like, this is all the things that we have tried to build into this class. So I teach chemistry 1A. This is general chemistry 1. The majority of our students are first-year students, so we have second and third, and all students, but majority first year. And so a lot of what we do is also helping students acclimate to the university. This class is incredibly flexible. As Michael was talking about, this is what we call a flipped classroom. So we have the videos that students watch on their own time. And then we have problem solving sessions where we go over problems live with me. So they do get time with me where we do a lot of chat storms where they're writing a lot in the chat. I have multiple people that help me in that session, particularly when I have very large classes. And so I have students that monitor the chat that are kind of live streaming what we're saying. And it's very interactive. I turn it off when I'm teaching, but I have students that are reporting back to me and stopping me. And it's just a very interactive classroom. So we have the flexibility built in with the videos, and students love the videos. That's the best thing for virtual, this remote instruction for me, is that students say that I am so clear because the videos are so clear, and that's exactly how they're designed to be. So that's a benefit for me and for them. To have this, this clarity that they can go back and watch it. I tell them that if I also post the slides, I post the questions that I do. And if they already know how to do all those questions, they don't have to watch that video. So this class, again, it's very flexible and it's personalized in the sense that if somebody already knows something, they don't have to go and do it. They don't have to go and spend the busy work of doing something. In chemistry, we have students that come in at so many different levels. And so to be able to design a personalized class that is really meeting students at where they are is just, it's such a great benefit to them. And it's really great for me because I don't have students that are bored, or I don't have students that are just completely overwhelmed. And so part of that personalization comes from using a teaching and learning system. It's called an adaptive learning system called ALEX. I'm going to show you a couple of things from the ALEX system in a second. But we have, through the system and through the design of the class, it becomes very personalized. Our number one goal is to be supportive of students. We have a very large teaching team, multiple TAs, multiple tutors, multiple undergraduate assistants and staff people from ACE, that we are all here to support students, and we talk about students and their progress. And so it's really great. And then also just really giving students a lot of resources. And so this is kind of really how we've designed this class to be. This is general chemistry. It's a 5-unit class. Students they should spend 15 hours a week. And so this is kind of just a clip from my syllabus showing students, this is how you should be spending your time. Okay, you need to watch our content videos. You have to complete ALEX, and you're going to be spending 8 to 10 hours a week on the homework. And this homework, though, is adaptive. It's based on what you know and what you don't know. So some students will only spend a couple hours, others will spend more than 10. But this just gives them an idea of what it is. And so when we have this flipped classroom, students are able to kind of choose what they want to spend their time on, versus kind of sitting in lecture the whole time. If they don't need to, they don't need to do that. And so that's one of the benefits, and something that I'm definitely going to keep in the future. This is a snapshot of ALEX. So ALEX stands for Assessment and Learning in Knowledge Spaces. This is a UC developed product. It was developed at UC Irvine. And what it shows, and so I show this screenshot to my students every single class that we have, so that they know that I am monitoring their progress. I know how they are going through this class. You can see here, this is from my last class. I said, you know what, our progress is dropping. It is time to catch up. It is time to find a partner to work with. And, I showed him only, less 65% of this class is still learning this very, very, very important topic of solving limiting reactant problems and solution. So find a partner and work together. And so in office hours, in our discussion sections, one of our focus this spring is really connecting students so that they have friends and they have partners that they can work with in this class. Just a couple more things. Alex helps me track students. So this is a student I can see. Number one, you see that they're doing their homework at 1:42 a.m. Okay. I can see that how they're working on this question. They got it wrong. They got it wrong. What this little gray icon says that they looked at the answer, they looked at the explanation, they still got it wrong, looked at the explanation, they got it right one time, but then got it wrong a couple. This is a student that so at the end, they were able to get 3. If I see kind of these long strings of colors, I will email the student and say, you know what, you need to come and work with me. And actually with this platform, it's really easy for me to email students and said, you know what, I posted an extra video. Let's work on that here. And so this is just an idea for you to see. In our class, we really try to share with students about what a growth mindset means. And actually in the chat, maybe Jody can I put a YouTube video that the students watch on a growth mindset. Our TAs talk about growth mindset. The whole class is about being able to grow. That learning takes work, learning takes time, and you're not competing with anyone. We recognize that it takes time. And so really kind of pushing this aspect of being able to put in the time to do this. And one of the really fun things that has happened now, because we are remote, is that our grading, our quizzes have now become a conversation. So we have a new platform that was recently adopted by Ucsc. It's called GradeScope. And you can see here, this is one of my regrade requests from a student. The student says, I feel I should have the incorrect conclusion for this question because my setup was correct. I did the process right. I just did I did not have the correct balanced equation. I technically found the correct limiting reactant, and then I wrote back and said, actually, I'm going to give you more credit than what you asked for because it was just one little minor error that was propagated through the rest of the question. And I tell the student, this is exactly why I'm using this platform, so I can give you credit for what you know. And so this is kind of this idea of having a conversation, of having this relationship with student that they can, a test is not just a grade and then you put it away. No, this now becomes a conversation. So I just wanted to just share with you just a few things about what we do in chemistry. I want to show you one more thing. I know that the time is running out.
We are a bit over time.
Oh, okay. Well, let me so that's that. We're not going to worry about what students worry about in chemistry. You can come back and you know what? My class is open to anyone who wants to join. Okay. It is so easy to join in a Zoom link. I will be happy to add you.
Thank you so much, Allegra. One of the things that we know is that when we get teachers talking about teaching, this is what happens. There's so much, and we don't spend a lot of time, or we didn't used to spend a lot of time talking with each other about teaching. So this will happen. So, we can come back to some of the things that Allegra talked about. She emphasized teaching students how to learn. That's something that we've really focused on, reaching out for help. She shares about herself. She asks questions like, what does it mean to be a college student and why are we learning about atoms? So these are all really wonderful pedagogical moves that we've actually been trying to get people to make for a long time, but that have really, become much more widely shared during COVID. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pranav, our linguistics professor, to talk to us about some pretty amazing stuff that he does in his classes on invented languages.
Thanks, Jody. And I just want to say, Allegra, I wish that you could have another hour. That was super interesting. And I'm so excited to learn more about Alex, actually. But I'm here actually to talk about this invented languages class. And this little thing here is my way of saying in the language we created last year. I'll talk a little bit more about that. After opening again, so you know, beyond reopening. So this is a class that's about invented languages, and by invented languages, I mean the languages that people create intentionally. And so when I say that, I think people often think of languages like Klingon and the languages, the Elvish languages, there are multiple actually, Na'vi, spoken in Avatar, and the languages from Game of Thrones like Valerian, which is represented here by the most famous, I think, person from the show. But in addition to these languages, I mean, it turns out that the practice of creating languages, what people in that community call conlanging, has been around for a very long time. And there are a lot of different reasons that people create languages, and we survey a lot of those intentions. But just to sort of very briefly talk about a couple that you might have heard of. So one of them, you know, one of the aims in the 20th century was the idea of creating sort of global language to create a kind of global consciousness. And Esperanto was the dream of actually fostering some kind of global conversation, you know, frankly, as a result of the cataclysms of the late 19th century and early 20th century. On the other hand, there are languages like the logical language, Lojban, which tries to build a language that's as logical as possible. And so this isn't really Lojban. This is an XKCD comic. It's one of my favorites. The original is actually in English, and what it says is, this guy says, you know, if you spoke Lojban, then everything you said would be unambiguous and clear. And then the response from the hat person is, yeah, but then I'd be talking to the kind of people who learned Lojban, which, you know, frankly, we talk a lot about that as well. So we talk about the communities that grow up around these languages and what their aims are. But we also, you know, learn a bit of linguistics, because people who make languages are often linguists. They're either trained formally as linguists, or they're really, really interested in linguistics. It's sort of a very odd thing where we're a tiny field, and yet there's a community of people who go and, you know, read our papers and read our books and use it to create languages. So I have taught this class, you know, in multiple ways. I taught it a couple times in person, but then it was converted to being completely online, what you could call fully asynchronous. And so the way that works is that people watch videos of me at this board here, the Learning Glass, and then they do some assignments. And I want to give you a sense of what that's like. So this is from this particular video. So in this one, what I've done is I've talked about the consonant grid. So this is an arrangement of the possible consonant sounds that you can produce based on the anatomy of the human vocal tract. And so then I went through a couple different languages, and I talked about how those languages pick and choose from this possible set of sounds. And so right now in this video, I'm talking about Klingon. So what I've done is I've talked about the things that are chosen from Klingon, and then I emphasize the ways in which the aim was to sometimes be expected and sometimes be unexpected. I chose this part in particular for two reasons. One of them is that it's a really cool language. Once you start sort of peering into the details, you begin to see the care that goes into crafting something like this. The other is that the inventor, Mark Okrand, is a UCSC BA alum and friend of our department and the university. And he's just a really wonderful person. So I'm going to show you now a little clip, and the clip is not actually about Klingon because the video is a bit long. Instead, what I'm going to do here is sort of jump you into a moment where we talk about how he got started working on Klingon. And the way he got started was he was actually originally asked by the Star Trek motion picture to produce lines in Vulcan. And so back in the early days of this, they had already recorded the scene. And so he had to produce Live Long and Prosper, but he had to produce it in Vulcan. And so what he was given was the film of the actors saying "Live Long and Prosper" in English. And then they said, now make a language that fits. Okay, so here's that setup. All right, I'm gonna expand this.
So if you just see someone produce Prosper, I'll just do that now. So at that point, that's what he had to work with. And so he's like, okay, I need it to be like Prosper in terms of what you see, but it's going to have to sound different. And he said, well, the beginning part with Prosper has the lips coming together because it's bilabial nasal. So he's like, okay, well, I'm not going to have, oh, sorry, it's a bilabial stop. So I'm not going to have a P. Instead, I'll put an M. Because those are going to look the same. And in a sense, what's nice about the vocal tract is that because most of it is behind the teeth, you can't see it. So it's just the lip movements that you sort of have to match. And sort of thinking about all of that, he got Prosper. From Prosper, he produced the Vulcan word mosma.
Okay, so I'll stop here in the interest of time and just say that this goes on to talk about how he went on to think about Klingon as well, and it's a really interesting discussion. I also want to, at this moment, Allegra did this. I want to plug the UCSC Online Ed team, so not just Michael, but also apparently our bouncer, Aaron Zachmeister, who I guess moonlights as an instructional designer when he's not serving as a bouncer, and was really pivotal in helping me conceive of how to use this technology. And I'm happy to talk about that in later periods, as well as Vernon Lagakis, who did a great job filming it. And then I also want to call out the fact that this was done with some resources, and they were provided by the undergraduate ed division, and then later by the UCOP Innovative Learning Technology Initiative, which gave us a lot of money to be able to create all of these videos of this learning glass technology. So this was a lot of work, and when I first designed the class, it was sort of this. There were these videos, and then there were assignments where they had to respond based on what I had in the lectures, and also to apply it to some other languages. But one thing that came out really quickly was the students wanted to build their own language, or own languages, I guess I should say. And so I should say that when there are other classes that do online, that do invented languages elsewhere, but they're mainly upper division electives for linguistics majors, and they're small. They're 10 to 30 people. And this class is a lower division general education course, and it it has, so right now we have about 600 students. Last year it swelled because of the pandemic, and it was 850. So it's a much bigger class. And so the idea of each person building a language when they know so little linguistics seemed unlikely. So what I did instead is I decided that we would build a language together, which I affectionately call the class lang. And so it's a really wonderful experience, and it has a bunch of benefits that I didn't even know about. So I did it purely for the pragmatic reasons of just trying to keep to one language as opposed to hundreds. But one of the things is that the students really get into it, and they get so involved that it creates a shared investment that helps to serve to fill that community void that Michael and Jody were talking about at the start of this discussion. So that shared enterprise really helps, and so there's a lot of conversation on the discussion boards related to the mythology of the language. People sometimes create writing systems. They do all of these sort of ancillary things themselves, and it's also experiential learning for them, which is really, really wonderful, because it's not about them sort of applying it to a language they don't know. They have to think very intentionally, what do I want to do here, because I'm in charge of this one part of the language. And that's really wonderful for them, and it filters into the assessment structure as well. In addition to this, the students also have to do some synchronous events. So I have 5 synchronous sessions throughout the course, and students have to attend one, and they're 1 hour, and they're spread out different weeks. And I do a poll, and I try to maximize the number of students who can attend any one. There's a written assignment if they can't attend. And we sort of go through in lockstep with the course design, and we do that part of the language in time. So it's a sort of fun meeting. It's very interactive, and there was a thought of us trying to do a version of this right now, but I sort of don't think we have the time. And maybe if we do, I can sort of show you how it works. But maybe I'll just say briefly, what happens essentially is that I do some polling ahead of time, and then they come into the meeting, and I've done some like analysis of their results. So like, for instance, this is from this year. They each give little comments, and I have a little program that I wrote that does some kind of topic modeling for them, and it sort of picks out the kinds of areas that they're interested in, and I have them read it before they come in, and then we do a series of votes, and we use a bunch of different polling platforms. One of the things I learned is that Zoom polls are not flexible enough, but I use some other polling systems, and we do a series of polls where I ask them about things in the chat, and then I sort of build something together with them. And we just did one 2 weeks ago, and at the end, one of the students said, "Oh my God, my heart was racing." It's amazing how much they get into it and how invested they get, because they realize they're in charge of what's going on. Okay, so here are some of the languages that we've built over the years. And there's a lot to say here. Like post facto, I realize how much the cultural consciousness plays a role in what they choose. So the first sort of time out, they really wanted to do a dragon language. That wasn't surprising. And it was only at the very end when they have to do a reflection assignment as their final that I realized what they really wanted to do was build a language for the White Walker dragon of Viserion in Game of Thrones, because that had just happened that summer. Similarly, there was a discussion during the pandemic about creating some like sort of force for good, and so we created this cosmic jellyfish. This was all their design. That's job was to spread knowledge and caring throughout the universe. I mean, it was amazing how that came from their own desires to have some sense of calm during I think a very, very challenging moment. So I have to also say that this is what happens when hundreds of people get involved. I mean, the conversations that lead to each of these points are so complicated. And it's the kind of thing that when one person builds a language, you can't get. So there's a level of depth that comes from it being a large social construction that's really not possible anywhere else, frankly, in the world right now.
Gentle nudge, Pranav, that we should keep moving.
Okay, so I'll just end by showing you one brief thing, which is that they also get to choose to dramatically recite a line at the end when they have to translate something back. And so this is one of the students, Gail Toyin. I asked her if I could show her clip, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I loved it so much. I don't have it anymore. Can you send it to me, my clip?" But it just shows you what the kinds of languages they create are like.
And
so that's all designed by them. So this is actually the sort of low-tech thing that I've done that has really reaped a lot of dividends. So I will stop there and turn it back over to Jody. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pranav. And I wish we had 3 hours so that each of you could present for an hour, because there's so much, there's just so much that's rich. I mean, here you really see that 600 people can do collaborative projects, right? And that's people sometimes tell me, I don't know if they can work in pairs. I'm not really sure how I'd grade them, and what we cut off by not being willing to open up the possibilities of collaboration. Creativity, ingenuity, and then what I really love about Pranam's work is the sophisticated use of technology paired with humor and whimsy. And you'll see humor and whimsy as really a part of, I mean, obviously you saw it with Michael Chemers as well. That has to be a part of our learning environments. It really does, because it's something that really gets students' attention. And at this point, there's an attention arms race. So without becoming sort of standing on our head performers, we do have to find ways to engage them. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Parker, who's going to show us some really amazing final project activity.
All right, thank you. And I'm excited to be here.
Hopefully you all can see my screen share. So I'm Jennifer Parker and I teach in the art department, and I also run the Open Lab Collaborative Research Center, which is a faculty-led research center, and it's across the arts and sciences. In the fall, I had a plan to work with the Genomics Institute. We had started a collaboration the previous year, but because of COVID, we were no longer able to have an exhibition, which was scheduled to be in the Cessna Art Gallery. This is a model of the Cessna Art Gallery that Colleen Jennings, who is an IT person in the arts division and a former student of mine when she was a digital arts and new media MFA student. And she designed this for the art department to be able to do our senior show when COVID hit in spring 2019. We have an annual show, and this was a way for the students to continue to do their show and be Irwin Scholars winners, and we could put them into this model. And so I thought about that over the summer, and I thought, oh, that's so great that we have this model. Everyone's making models. We'll be able to use that. And then COVID kept going, right? And so it's like, all right, what are we going to do in the fall? And how can I think about a kind of teaching moment with the Genomics Institute as a way for us to make a show? And what does it mean to be from a place? And how do we be alone together? And I started to imagine the gallery kind of not just a space that you could go into, but one that you could actually like break open. And did we have to show work that was in a box? Could we show work under the water? Could we be up in the sky? What happens when we start to de-silo research? And the work within the arts and genomics is really across the humanities and across the sciences. It's working with biology, it's working with literature, it's working with artists from around the globe. And I started to imagine that actually we could be kind of these hovering spheres. And what I liked about the spheres was that they also weren't squares, right? We've been in these squares, and how can we think about what we can't see? And I'm a sculptor, I have a background in sculpture. Usually I'd be teaching in the metal shop or in robotics or something like that. So I was really wanting to see and imagine these kinds of spheres as research. And if we weren't in our disciplines and our departments and in our divisions, we could kind of collide with each other, and we could be this sort of, bacteria or, air that we sort of breathe when we walk around campus. And so each one of these spheres represents a different project. Some of it's from the Genomics Institute, some of it's from art, some of it's from visiting artists from around the world that I invited to participate. And it was just a really fun experience to work with the Genomics Institute and to work with past students and a few new students who also helped work with me on it. There's a website that goes with it. It's called What Makes Us Human. And I wanted to be able to have a kind of virtual space as well as an index of these projects. So you could walk through or go through and look at seeing all the different projects that we had and click on them. This is a recording, so it's kind of weird. This is what the website looks like. And you can click on it and go through it and learn about each of the projects on a simple page. So you would just sort of click on that page through hitting the orb. So the Assist Lab is in engineering. And then you could get a small blurb about it. And to learn more, you could click on the Learn More button and go basically to that website, right? As I was thinking about making art and moving through the ways that we collect information, there's so many pages already. So how can we connect our pages in ways that actually are about kind of going into the internet, into the ways in which we think about our research, and not just be limited to one kind of portal and being the internet page or Google, but that you could actually go through these spheres and into other ways of looking and knowing that would sort of ask new questions and curiosity would bounce. So this is me going through the website. What you're seeing, you click on these orbs, you click on these images, and you can learn more about each one. This is what the platform ended up looking like. So when you go through the door, you are then floating above. I'm not going to go into that virtual hub at the moment because we don't have a lot of time, but you can go to whatmakesushuman.org and you can see it, or you can go to whatmakesushuman.net and you can actually go into the virtual exhibition. From that experience, some of the graduate students that worked on projects with me in that space wanted to continue to work, and one of them Actually, I'm going to skip this project because we just don't have enough time. But I was supposed to go on sabbatical, life of a researcher, didn't go on sabbatical, stayed and said, okay, I'll do a special topics class with my students and they can work on this theme of what makes us human. And we went and did a ton of really great projects. So you can also see this. I know Jody's going to put it in the link. You can go through it. They made virtual hubs. They created posters of their projects and really thought about these ideas, being able to use the website as a resource to go through and look at the different ways in which they could think about their relationship to what it means to be human and what makes them human or what makes us human or non-human in relation to different species on the planet. But an exciting thing that also happened from that was this data visualization collective. You know, here we are, we're all looking at the COVID graph, like what's the worst thing that's happening? Who's in the, you know, who's getting better? What should we go outside? You know, we became kind of as a culture really interested in data visualization. So I felt like it was a great time and it was easy for me to do in this remote way for me to gather students from across campus to work together because we weren't sort of subject to our normal schedules. And Jessica, Kendall Barr, who's environmental studies, ecology PhD student, is particularly interested in this in the relationship to science communication, less so as a kind of a hybridity of wanting to sort of mix the idea of science and art, but really wanting to communicate and think about what is data visualization. So she's got a little clip here that I'm going to share with you so you can hear from the graduate students, because all of our research is so pivotal and so important to be able to have the kind of access to graduate student learning on this campus, and how that works with peer-to-peer learning with our undergraduates and how much I learned from them. Like, this was a really fun experience. We had people from across campus. So this is Jessica. She led the project group and every week they had a different task that they had to produce. And she's going to explain to you what data visualization is.
So why should we even bother visualizing our data? There's basically two reasons. We might want to just explore our data. As scientists, it's really important to visualize your data really early on. Before you run any stats, you want to just figure out what's there, because you won't be asking the right questions if you're not exploring first. So this is like an early plot that I did in R. I was looking at 3 different animals and their activity patterns. ODBA is called overall dynamic body acceleration. So it's basically a measure of how much the animal is moving. And then density is showing like how much of the 100% of the data is in a certain range of ODBA. So you can see that the 3 animals have different activity patterns. They basically they have this like bimodal distribution. So there's a lot of time that the animals spend inactive, not moving at all. And then there's some time that the animals spend active. And just by visualizing this data, I can process, I think it was like 20 gigabytes of data, and just look at it really quick and say, oh, this one animal, Snoozy Susie, who was a weanling elephant seal, was way more active than the other 2 animals. And then I can go one step further. If I happen to like that graph that I used in my exploratory analysis, I can develop that into something that I would use for communication. And the reason why we need to visualize data is if you're trying to communicate your data with like a spreadsheet, no one's going to understand that. So this is a lot faster and more clear for your audience.
So hopefully you could hear that. It was a little low on my end. I'm sorry if it was. And so from that, and then having created these visual or these virtual exhibitions, I was like, this is cool. Let's go ahead and for the end of the quarter, let's make a Mozilla Hub. And Mozilla Hub is a pretty easy, fast to learn project. These are some of the students. So we had astronomy, we had astrophysics, we had games, we had undergraduate, like we really had a broad spectrum of students. So I said, let's go ahead and create a Mozilla Hub. and show off this work. And what does it mean to have a gallery show of data visualizations, and how can we learn about the experience of moving through different data sets and how they influence each other, but also as a way to sort of explore the work and feel like we're seeing something in a new, different way, that it's sort of, you know, embodied in a way in which you can move through a gallery space the same way that you might move through and think about art. You can then look at and think about how we learn information and how different that is when you are actually able to move through space and hear it and have sound. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen sharing, but that gives you sort of an idea of what it is that there it is, kind of moving again, what we did this quarter or last quarter.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And, you know, in addition to just the sheer beauty and brilliance, the bringing together of art and science in these projects is really characteristic of a lot that's been happening at UCSC in the past few years. And one other thing that really struck me that I hadn't thought about so much before is that final projects are so individualized. You do your final project, you give it to the instructor gives it back to you, and no one else in the class benefits from it. And what's so amazing about the way you can go through and see what everyone has done at the same time, in addition to, in some sense, the public facing. I love that the students asked for data visualization, and that you were able to produce a just-in-time teaching experience. I think that's a huge ask for instructors at a research university who are, you know, so busy they can't just constantly be redesigning classes. But one of the things that COVID did do was give people a little bit more time for their teaching because their research was kind of stopped in its tracks.
Well, and I would say that actually it was the students. The students had the time, and you know, they really led this collective, and I put it together as an independent study group, and I sort of formatted it and checked in with them, and you know, went and worked with them. But it was really student driven, and I think that kind of agency wasn't as available before in this way. So that I agree with what you're saying there, Jody. But I also think for me, it was just a delight to see the student, to be able to support it. I'd be like, sure, this is not as much work as, you know, some of the other things that I had done, because the students were so engaged and so interested. And I was just kind of really assisting with the tools and creating a kind of cohesiveness with the community building around it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's actually come up in all three of the presentations. One of the things that at the beginning of COVID, we were trying to sort of explain to people who, because most of us had no experience with online education, is that the vectors of relationship in an in-person class are very much the instructor to each student. If you think about, like, you know, I always think of the top of a Buddhist stupa with prayer flags coming off it. And, you know, the students are all around the outside and the instructor's up there and everyone's having an individualized experience. And in an online space, really, it's about the success entails building relationships. So Allegra talked about community of learners, Pranav talked about radical collaboration, and, you know, Jennifer is really speaking so eloquently about the collectivity. And I think we will yield so much more learning and so much more happiness if we can figure out how to make the school part of people's college education a more collective and collaborative and community building experience. So that's something that we've been using Discord and Slack and tools, but lots of other things. So with that, I want to open it up for questions. And what you can do is, if you scroll along the bottom of your screen, you'll see something called reactions. And if you hit reactions, you will see something that says raise hand. And then for the person who asked me about this, you will see both in the participants list, which you can get from clicking on participants in that same part of the screen, or from looking at the order in which people start appearing at the top of page 1, I can tell the order in which the question was asked. So it's really great. We call it taking stack in an in-person class, but when you're teaching 600 people, it's very hard to remember whose hand went up first and whose hand went up second. So Zoom takes the stack for us. Okay. Yes, and you should always be updating your Zoom, because it really does, for the most part, get better. You know, I try to remember to update it every couple of days, because they're always making improvements, and also security improvements. Sarah Gerhardt, hi. And thanks for making a Flipgrid video.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to do that. It was really nice to meet you guys, the people I didn't know. And yeah, I'm just so curious about how to make the learning experience better. But I have to say, I'm really nervous about like a flipped classroom. I keep hearing about it. And I'm nervous about going asynchronous. So I'm teaching at Cabrillo and I've made my lectures synchronous and interactive. But the labs are asynchronous. So I'm kind of like part of the way. But I think my concern or my question is about how would I make classroom time effective once we're back in person if I do a flipped classroom model, but say only a few of the students watch the videos ahead of time. I think that's my biggest question and concern about switching to that kind of teaching learning modality.
So I'm going to do a quick active translation, and then I'm going to throw it open to whoever wants to. So for those of you who don't talk about this stuff all day long, this is probably obvious, but asynchronous courses don't have any meetings, or they have very few meetings. The dog is, of course, very excited right now in real time. So synchronous meetings obviously happen in real time. And a flipped classroom is one in which students watch lecture videos in advance, and then the classroom time is spent doing other things. The quick answer is, the quick and easy answer is they need to do some form of activity after watching the video so that you can see when you go into the classroom and you let them know that you will be looking, right? But what have other people come up with around flipped and asynchronous to make it really work?
I have a kind of a share. I have a Google Doc that I give students, and one of my modules in my Canvas is like, this is our study plan for this week. This is what you should be doing for this week. You need to watch this video. Like all the videos have due dates, which the students made me do. I figured out they were the ones who asked, we need due dates to stay on track. But really just kind of setting expectations and say, this is where you need to go. And I have all my announcements on that page. And so that really helps them monitor, and I let them know kind of with ample time, okay, this is how many videos you have this week. This is how many minutes. This is, you need to set this aside, this time aside so that you can be ready for our synchronous session.
Michael?
Yeah, I have a couple of ideas. One is to make the classroom sessions a project-based learning. So make the students accountable to their peers when they come in. And for that first or second session, you might have a few students who are like, oh, I didn't do it. I can't do this. But they'll learn quickly that they need to watch the videos to be accountable to their peers in developing the project. And the other thing that one of my colleagues, Caitlin Binder, who's a lecturer at UCSC, does in her courses is she always designs an activity for the in-person component of a flipped course, such that a student who hasn't watched the pre-recorded videos can still participate in it.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to read a question from the chat, and then we're going to go to Theodora. So the question from the chat was, do they get better support from instructors with more online in TA sessions? Do they get better support from instructors with more online, including asynchronous sessions? And more importantly, do students feel better supported in large courses than with strictly in-person large courses? And I'm wondering if anyone would like to talk about that. I mean, certainly I saw a lot of people actively working with TAs to get the TAs to do a lot more sort of general personhood support than they might in an in-person. Now, some TAs are doing that, but way more people were having the TAs check in with the students with how they were doing beyond their actual learning. I'm going to toss this one to Kendra and say, Kendra, do you have any other thoughts about this, since you were our master of graduate ceremonies?
I'm happy to talk about this, but I would actually love to hear from the faculty who work with TAs. I think a lot about graduate students being, much more aware sometimes of how students are doing, because they're often the ones who are assessing students, grading student work, but also the ones who are usually the first to know when students are, having difficulties with their learning or having crises in their lives that make it hard for them to focus on their learning. And I think that more than ever, that's true during the pandemic, but I think that that's actually been something that's consistent in any large class, whether it was conducted in person or online. So I think I wouldn't know to say if there's any difference. I think there's actually more consistency, but I would love to hear from others who teach with TAs, because I think you also have a sense for that, or if there are grad students in the room, it'd be great to hear from you too.
Pranav, Allegra. Yeah, Pranav, what about you?
Well,
You've got big classes.
Yeah, I mean, I can say a couple things. I don't know, like if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, one thing that's come from the asynchrony is that we just want to connect. And so that means that people give out their cell phone numbers to have students text them. You know, I'm on their Discord. We have Piazza. We have all of these different ways for them to connect with us. And what that means is I will get things at 11 at night, and I don't respond to those, but my TAs do, because of what Kendra was talking about. They really feel that responsiveness is like part of their ethical culture. And so I think one thing that has been really good for the students is they really do get just-in-time response at 1:40 in the morning, like Allegra is saying. But I don't know if that's sustainable, but that's one innovation that's happened, and that's happened in general for working now. So that's what I have seen from my own students, and we've told them, you have to stop doing this, because it's really, there has to be a balance. We don't know where that balance is, because we're sort of trying to navigate a crisis right now.
Beautiful. Allegra.
Yeah, I think just because we've gotten so much more used to using these digital tools that we're able to, and it's kind of come from the chat, track students and their engagement with the course more than we would if we were in person and never had to learn about all of these tools. So yeah, I know for me, my TAs they're doing much different work. And actually, so one of the slides that I was going to show you was my TA doing her poll of what do you have anxiety about in this class, and addressing 8 different ways of how to make it through, both learning the chemistry, but then also just make it through as a student, make it through as a person, recognizing all the resources on campus. And so yeah, I think we're all working harder right now because we're teaching both synchronous and asynchronous.
I'll just really quickly add here, one thing that's really different about online courses is that and I'll tell a quick story first. So someone who developed an online course very early on had a colleague ask, so are you working less now because you have this online course full of asynchronous videos? And the answer was no, the work that I do has changed. And it's changed in such a way, as you saw in all of those presentations, where the faculty member becomes a kind of conductor or a facilitator of learning. And so to answer the question of, are the students better supported? It's very different. And so there are teaching teams that are necessary in online courses, especially online courses, to facilitate that learning. And so much of the faculty and TA time is shifted to those communications and personalization, and away from the focus on lectures or classroom engagement.
Thank you, Michael. So we'll take Theodora's question, and then we have one final engagement exercise for you. So before you leave, we're gonna pull you back in for one more active moment. But Theodora, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you so much all. This has been really fascinating. And my question is very much related to the end of the discussion, and recommendations for, if you don't have a team and a videographer to help support you, I guess ways that you've been able to both increase collaboration and working with students at that sense of community, but also being able to use your time efficiently, and using the students to be able to grade each other, and any other tools you have to be able to sort of not be spending 24 hours a day with those active engagements.
I can speak to that a little bit. So, I've been using Flipgrid, which if you haven't used that, that's great. And it's fun because students can upload their projects or in progress of where they are, and then they can look at each other's work and post comments and get a sense of community that way, so they can sort of see what everyone is doing. And I also use Google Slides as a way for everyone, just everything goes on Google Slides. And so I can keep track of what they're doing all the time, and it takes all different kinds of media. So whether they're putting in a document or images or a movie, all of their research, and it just becomes a kind of a sketchbook or, you know, research book of what they've been doing and how they've been monitoring their time. And it's one link, right? So I can just look at their Google Slides and see where they are as if I'm looking through a kind of homemade book or something like that. So that's been a great way for me to be able to work with them and then have them work with each other and kind of keep track of all of the different kind of media that they produce.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I don't know what you teach, Theodora, but you know, there's a lot of noise on the wires about the ungrading movement or the contract grading movement, and that's you know, pretty clearly better for learning. But it's also helpful for faculty labor. So it's, you know, it's ethically better, it's learning wise better, and it's you know, also helps with time. It doesn't work for everything, and I want to be really crystal clear that it doesn't work in all fields. Lower division STEM courses, it's very hard to practice ungrading. But if you're interested, go and Google ungrading, and anyone on the call who's like, what's she talking about? And see, obviously, and this has come up with in the chat as it always does, you know, we were an ungrading campus when I came to work here, and it made a huge difference. And you will not find us running around defending grades. When we got to a certain size, narrative evaluations were also not an option. So I want to be realistic about that, but there's no question that the orientation to learning on our campus, we have to work harder with grades in place to keep learning at the center of the conversation. And one of the good things about the last year is that it's actually allowed us to really begin to put learning back in the center of things. So with that, Michael, do you want to take us through our last two activities?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you, Jody. Okay, so before we go back to that poll that you responded to in the very beginning, we're going to ask you to complete an exit ticket. And this is going to get really chaotic, but I would like all of you to go into the chat and to respond to the question I'm placing in the chat right now, which is, what is one takeaway from today's presentation that you have? So one takeaway from today's presentation.
Matt, talking to colleagues is good. Yes.
Yes, we're going to do more of these.
Faculty are doing amazing things, new platforms for engagement. I want to figure out how to put my body in front of a PowerPoint. Yeah, that's an advanced practice. I can see the order of questions in Zoom. That's great. That's your takeaway. Too many ideas. Many people are committed to the teaching experience at UCSC. Okay, so yes, many more media involved. Keep bringing your thoughts. I see learning at UCSC is very different from when Chris was a student in the 80s. That's true, but we're also trying to keep some of that learning innovation at the heart of what we do. We feel really passionate about tying into that heritage of innovation and experimentation that happened at UCSC, see above under ungrading. So with that, Michael, why don't we open that poll back up again as the questions are still coming in, and we're gonna do something that we do as instructors. We're gonna ask you the same question at the end of class that we asked you at the beginning.
Yes.
And see how you feel now.
Yes. While you're answering the poll, we showed you so many clips today that were really high end and produced with a videographer. And if you don't have that resource, don't worry about it. Honestly, like if you think back to the student-centered model that Allegra presented, the ability to connect with and support your students, having videos that are authentic, made on your phone, that's good. That helps accomplish those goals.
So yeah, we'll put 30 more seconds in this poll, and I just would really like to thank my colleagues who came out tonight after what was no doubt also a long day to offer their creativity and their expertise and their really passion for teaching and for student learning. So I'm so grateful, and I'm actually really happy that we left you excited. That was all we were trying to accomplish this evening. And so with that, we will do the obligatory Zoom wave and say thank you so much. And you can always contact us at online@ucsc.edu or CITL at ucsc.edu. So we're very easy to find. We have a monthly teaching newsletter that we produce that you can subscribe to even if you're not at UCSC. And we just look forward to continuing this conversation. So good night, everybody. And thank you so much to the UR folks for helping to make this a reality.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all.